and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akari. The headlines. United Nations wants special attention placed on displaced women and children as Ukraine's First Lady hosts second summit of First Ladies and Gentlemen in Kiev. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky nominates new Prosecutor General. And French President Emmanuel Macron criticizes Russian presence in Africa during his visit to Cameroon. We begin this morning with news that the United Nations is worried that the Russian invasion of Ukraine would lead to many women and girls being trafficked and exploited as they flee the fighting, and wants special attention on them in any peace or rebuilding efforts in the country. Speaking virtually at the second edition of the Summit of First Ladies and Gentlemen, organized by the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena, Zelenskyy, in the capital, Kiev, UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed asked the international community to step up support in this regard. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says the idea is that on day one of peace, rebuilding of the country should start. A number of other international personalities joined the event virtually from Europe, the United States, and elsewhere to show solidarity with the Ukrainian cause.
On the 150th day of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the First Lady of Ukraine is hosting the second summit of First Ladies and Gentlemen in Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, to draw the world's attention to the consequences of the war on children and women.
Strength and resilience for the possible.
Renowned British television talk show host Piers Morgan and Ukrainian TV news anchor Hannah Homonai are compares for the event.
Thank you for having me here. It's a great privilege. The First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenskyy.
Holding across 5 cities in Europe and the United States of America, the hybrid event is the brainchild of the wife of the President of Ukraine, Olena Zelenskyy, who is joined by at least 21 First Ladies across the world, including the wife of U.S. President Jill Biden.
Honor the memory of all the Ukrainians, children and adults, military.
A moment of silence for victims of Russia's invasion of her country marks the start of her call to rally support for Ukraine.
Thank you. No matter the suffering, we will be able to do everything in order for the child's smiles and happiness and calm and tranquility to stay in our life. And we are inviting everyone, all those who support the victory over brutality, to join us.
America's First Lady, Jill Biden, who days ago had hosted Ms. Zelenskyy, added her voice to strengthen the international community's resolve to help women and children.
Through our humanitarian assistance, we are working to address the devastating physical and mental impact of this war. This includes increased access to primary and trauma medical care, food, clean water, and accessible shelter, as well as support to survivors of gender-based violence. The United States remains steadfast in our support for Ukraine.
The President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky.
Attending the summit in person, the President of Ukraine, in his usual defiant demeanor, insists that his country will not break.
The war will not make us hostages of those brutality actions committed by the occupying forces on the territory of our brave and peaceful country. Why are we talking about rebuilding now when we're still at war? We're doing so that on the very first day of the peace we would be able to feel it comprehensively, so that there would be a systemic rebuilding, reconstruction of everything that was destroyed by the Russian army.
5 panel sessions discussed various efforts to rebuild Ukraine as the United Nations makes a case for the care of women and girls.
When forced to flee, women face the risk of trafficking and sexual exploitation. It is crucial that the international community steps up to support Ukrainian women and girls and provides them with the protection that they need.
Former British footballer and UNICEF ambassador David Beckham is among the dignitaries that joined the event virtually. In an emotion-laden voice, the father of 4 sympathizes with children in Ukraine.
I cannot imagine what the Ukrainian people have gone through these past 5 months. But I do know through my experiences with UNICEF that getting back to routines through education and learning is a great healer for many children.
The summit also provided an opportunity to raise funds for humanitarian assistance now and in the immediate future for Ukraine. A total of $3.2 million was realized for the reanimation medical vehicles, which the First Lady hopes to use for the funding of at least 32 ambulances to be deployed to the most affected areas of Ukraine.
Russia has claimed hitting military targets and foreign mercenaries bases in Donetsk with artillery barrages, while Ukraine claimed destroying a raft of Russian weapons in its southern region, reducing the Russian intensity of attacks. Major General Igor Konashenkov, Russian Ministry of Defense spokesperson, said at a press briefing that Russian troops continue to attack military targets in Donetsk and Mykolaiv over the past 24 hours. According to General Konashenkov, the OSA-AKM anti-aircraft missile launcher, a U.S.-made counter-battery radio station, and 8 depots of rocket, artillery, weapons, and ammunition were also destroyed. The spokesman said the Russian armed forces used high-precision air-based missiles to hit a temporary deployment point of foreign legion units near Donetsk's Konstantinova, killing over 40 of them, most of them Polish. Russia also attacked 1 artillery battalion of Ukraine with high-precision weapons, destroying more than 70% of its personnel and weapons. That's according to the spokesperson. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, on the other hand, said that battles between the 2 sides were carried out along the contact lines, and Russian troops were concentrating to prepare for strikes on Ukrainian cities of Severodonetsk and Mykolaiv. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesperson says that Russia's efforts to, quote, absorb Ukrainian territories were null and void. Oleg Nikolenko specifically said it would be totally untrue if residents in Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions were to vote in a referendum that could happen in September. Ukraine would regard such a referendum held in occupied territories about joining Russia as a reason for the international community to introduce more sanctions against Russia and send more weapons to Ukraine. Mr. Nikolenko added that Russia does not allow Ukrainian humanitarian aid onto occupied territories and is trying to establish local administrations to introduce the Russian ruble as currency and is simplifying the procedure for obtaining Russian citizenship. Ukraine regards such efforts as null and void as the occupied territories and citizens remain Ukrainian. The Kremlin has said the future of occupied regions of Ukraine will be decided by residents. The efforts at integration with Russia come amidst vocal Ukrainian pledges to retake the strategic Black Sea region soon in a major counteroffensive.
The Russian Federation is trying to absorb the territories it occupied in Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. They are trying to set up occupation administrations and also to simplify the procedure for obtaining Russian citizenship. They are doing it to stage the so-called referendum. According to their statements, it might happen in September, in order to justify the occupation and pretend that those territories voluntarily decided to join Russia, which is totally untrue. We see that the demand for Russian passports among the local population is very low. People living in Kherson region stand against the occupation. They are not joining schools, local administrations, police forces. So that's why Russians have to bring they citizens from Russia to fill in positions in the local administrations. As you know, the territories that Russia seized are closed. Ukrainian government is not able to deliver any humanitarian aid to those territories. So that's why they are creating conditions for people so that in order to receive humanitarian aid from Russian occupation administration, people have to have Russian citizenship. So that's why we see this. There are some cases, but it's not something that is mainstream among the local population. Ukrainian government is considering different options how to react to the situation when population in the occupied territories receive Russian citizenship. Certain legislation is being developed now, but I think the final decision has not been taken. We proceed from the fact that if a person was forced to obtain the citizenship, he is not. He will not bear responsibility. But if the person tries to obtain the citizenship in order to serve in the occupation administrations to gain his personal interest, probably for these categories of people will be a responsibility. They are using the same tactics that they used back in 2014 in Crimea and Donbass. They are trying to establish local administrations, introduce ruble as a currency, provide Russian citizenship to local population. But for us, this move is null and void. It has no legal implications. Those territories, people living on those territories are Ukrainian. For us, it doesn't change anything. For us, those territories will remain Ukrainian. The same applies to the international community. But we think that staging those referendums must be a clear criteria for new sanctions, for new economic sanctions, and providing Ukraine with more weapons.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has nominated Andrei Kostin, a lawmaker from the President's Servant of the People's Party, as the country's next Prosecutor General. Mr. Zelensky submitted a formal request to Parliament to vote to confirm Mr. Kostin's appointment to replace Irina Venediktova, who was removed as Prosecutor General earlier this month. It was not immediately clear when Parliament would be voting on Mr. Kostin's appointment. Let's talk to Mr. Temitope Olodo, President, Africa Security Forum, who joins us from the British capital, London. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
The Ukrainians say they are planning a major counter-offensive. Anyone hearing this would get the impression that there is a great deal of confidence now that they have received quite a number of weapons that they can use to go on the offensive. But when you look at what is happening on the Russian side, maybe some cooler heads would say if this happens, there could be a bloodbath on either side.
There's no doubt. We know that in the last 48 hours, a lot has happened. We know that even Kiev itself has confirmed that Russian, warplanes, had about 13, weapon or missiles striking, civilian areas, which of course Russians have denied. We know that they've been attacking bridges in southern part of Ukraine. And we know that they've had discussions with the Americans, the defense secretary, in terms of weapons that are the deliveries that are coming in and, cap on, energy. So there's a lot that is happening, and all this is just more or less making many of us that are watching to ask the question, when will this end? Because if this tit-tat continues and Russia is hitting and they are, attacking back, when will this end? And that's the reason why, again, being able to find a soft diplomacy approach, similar to the approach that is used on the grain, which of course did not really work at the beginning, but we're hoping will work, might be a way to de-escalate, because this crisis doesn't seem to be showing us any end at sight from what I'm seeing.
Two points here. You referenced the grain deal. Can that actually go on when both sides are planning to make advances on the military field? I mean, you are the expert here, but can that go on simultaneously, especially because the route through which the grains are supposed to pass are routes that give either side leverage? So it's not really likely that those places are not subject to attacks if both sides are planning counteroffensives. That's one. Second is that you and I had discussed on this program before now the fact that the West had restrained itself from giving Ukraine offensive weapons because Russia had said that would be a red line beyond which it would then need to draw in other countries as adversaries. But it seems as if that red line has now been crossed, because if Ukraine is going to go on the offensive, it believes it has enough weaponry to do so.
Yes, and Russia will want to definitely punish them. But going back to your first question, it's quite ironic because I know Ukraine has come out to say, about 80+ vessels are waiting to be shipped out, with grains. And that, of course, is good news because at least we're seeing a kind of a movement there. But if this offensive and this attack is intensified, those grains that we're all relying on to be coming out of Ukraine will cease. They might have some that are already very close to the port, which would fall outside the exclusive zone that want to be hit. But definitely, if there is this attack that is ongoing, definitely those grains will stop again, and then we'll go back to square one. So this is definitely a challenge. And of course, like we rightly said, red lines have been put there by the Russians, and the West have more or less crossed that red line. And I know why the West is crossing that red line, because they also have just made a decision, as painful as it is, to reduce their dependence on Russia energy at least by 15%, and also talking about creating caps, with the UK and America talking about that. So they are looking at hitting Russia in whichever way they could. And Russia is not going to sit down idle and expect them to send this thing their way and receive it voluntarily. They are going to hit back. So what we don't know is how hard Russia will hit back. Will Russia hit back in such a way that will cause condemnation across the world? Will they use weapons that they threaten that they will use, which is nuclear? We don't know. Will they even attempt to charge up their batteries so that everybody in the world will be shaking? And maybe that might be the changer. That might be the game changer where the West might decide to pull back a bit, when they see that Russia actually met their threat. But what we don't know is how far this will go, because Russia definitely will not sit idle and allow the West to continue to fight this war by proxy and hit them hard, both economically and both on the war front.
Just before I let you go, and quickly, let me bring it home. You are in the British capital, London, and one of my guests on the program a few days ago had said, look, if this conflict does not end by September, October, the situation will bring out the population in many of the countries in Europe, because that would be winter, and this issue of gas and so on will no longer be discussion in fora like you and I are discussing now. It will be out there on the streets because people will have problems with heating. Now, you are in the British capital, and Britain is known for extreme weathers when it comes to winter like this. So on the streets and with what you know, is that a real threat? And are people beginning to look at the very possibility that this really could be the case?
There's nothing that is off. There's nothing that is off the table. As we speak, there are strikes that is going on, with over 40,000 rail workers on strike, asking for money, and the workers have said we've had enough. This is a summer. This is a time where we're really going to come out and hit this government hard. So anything can happen. And we know across the Western world that myself and yourself have discussed before, there's a lot of government that are unstable at the moment. So Russia will stay there. I mean, Putin will be there, but most of those leaders are going to be replaced. What they will be replaced with is what we don't know. And if those people they are replaced with will continue with this offensive of, looking at Russia as number one enemy. If that is the case, then we have a serious problem at our hands. But do not be a doubt, and I don't want your viewers to be a doubt, that when the British people or the European citizens felt enough is enough, when they can't, when they're wearing their socks, like I'm wearing my socks in my room right now, then things will change, because we're going to go out there and show them exactly what we need and say enough is enough. And I think that is the reason why Ukraine and the president of Ukraine is coming back to say this is blackmail from Russia against Europe, and saying all those fancy words, because it could see that very soon there's going to be a change in the opinion poll. And once politicians see a change in the opinion poll, they will start to reverse back. They may be giving the lip service, but all those things that they're giving out and all those support will definitely dry up.
So there is a deadline to all of this. We'll have to wait to see and hope that, as you and I have discussed previously, that this comes to an end much sooner than later. Thank you so much for your time on the program this morning, and please continue to stay safe out there.
Thank you so much, and thanks for your views. Thank you.
After the break, Ukraine aims to strike a deal for $15 to $20 billion in aid from the IMF before the year ends. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. French President Emmanuel Macron has criticized Russia's influence in Africa, deeming it a preoccupation for the continent's people during an official visit to Cameroon. Speaking in Yaoundé alongside his Cameroonian counterpart Paul Biya, Mr. Macron said Russia's presence in Africa was based on misinformation, militias, and complicity with weakened powers. Mr. Biya, whose government signed a cooperation agreement with Russia in April, said the accord was normal and constituted only an act of managing its bilateral relations with the country, in effect since 2015.
This hybrid Russian presence, which involves misinformation, militias, new forms of what I have trouble qualifying as cooperation, but complicity with weakened powers, or completely illegitimate ones when it comes to military juntas, is a preoccupation. I think it's first of all a preoccupation for the African continent. And so France, as a friend of Africa, will do everything so that, well, first of all, every country has the freedom to have diplomatic ties and defend the interests of their people. That's the basic principle of what we all are doing for ourselves, so that this format does not spread too much. Because I do not think it is a good thing. I especially think it's not good for the people. The rise in the cost of raw materials and the difficulties in terms of supplies in the context of inflation, which is partly caused by an uncoordinated global restart, but has been largely worsened by the war launched by Russia and Ukraine, does not spare Africa, nor the Middle East or Europe.
Regarding the relations with Russia, it dates back a long time, and we have signed a cooperation agreement with this country, which has expired and which we renewed. We signed it. The trip of my minister to Russia has no connection with the situation of war in Ukraine. And so, this is normal. People are, of course, worried because of the war in Ukraine. We did not have to get involved in this problem, and it's out of the question for us to get involved in it. And so, it's purely an act of management of our bilateral relations.
The White House's national security spokesperson has said that topics for an oncoming phone call between U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping are expected to include tensions over Taiwan and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In a briefing for reporters, John Kirby said managing the competition between the two countries is also expected to come up in the call, which Mr. Biden had said on Monday is expected later on this week. It will be the fifth call between the two leaders. Kirby said there were issues of tension in this relationship, but also areas where cooperation is possible, such as climate change. And Chinese President Xi Jinping has held talks with visiting Indonesian President Joko Widodo in Beijing on bilateral relations and on international and regional issues of mutual interest. The two presidents also exchanged views on issues including the Ukraine crisis, where they shared the view that the international community should create conditions for peace talks, play a constructive role in de-escalating the situation and stabilizing the global economic order, as well as work together to maintain the hard-won peace and stability in the region. Let's talk now to Andrzej Matisak, Deputy Head, Foreign Desk, Pravda newspaper. He joins us virtually from Bratislava in Slovakia. Good morning to you, Andrzej. Nice to see you again.
Good morning. Good to be back on your program. Thank you for inviting me.
Let me start from where I stopped with my last guest, and that is where we are. Yesterday, the energy ministers of the EU met to ink a deal on this gas cuts and more prudent usage of gas in Europe. And they were aiming for 15%. But there were so many exemptions and opt-outs for national governments that it was difficult to know what exactly was eventually agreed. What did you make of that?
I think this is a kind of a good compromise. I think that the EU should be a little bit more ambitious in cutting off the gas supplies from Russia. But I think at the end, this is a good compromise. For example, for my country, it means that we are not cutting almost anything because our gas storages are quite full, so we can use that gas from storages. And still, the situation is not that critical that it requires cutting off the gas supplies and cutting off the gas consumption. So we will see how everything will evolve, because it's definitely depends on how much gas will flow from Russia to Europe. But I think it clearly shows that there is an understanding that we have to get ready, especially if winter will be harsh. The countries, EU countries, have to get ready to be prepared for maybe even a critical situation, especially for industries, and of course also for people, because in many countries, including my, gas is very important for heating and so on. But so far, I think, as I said, it's quite usual having this kind of compromise. There are some exemptions from some countries who are using more gas. Some of them are using less gas. So we will see how it will look like in reality.
Let's come to the other issue of another deal that so many people were looking forward or are looking forward to seeing implement, and that's the grain deal, the deal by which grain products will be allowed out of Ukraine, and then Russia also will be able to send across fertilizer and a couple of other things that the world needs and which have been stopped by virtue of this conflict in Ukraine. That deal was put in the balance when what happened on Saturday, a couple of hours before or after the deal was struck, happened, which was a missile strike on Odessa. But since then, all indications are that in spite of that, the deal is going to go ahead. So there are people who are wondering that, given that background and given what Europe is doing with energy supplies, what do you see happening with the grain deal? Is it going to go ahead, or are there going to have to be adjustments to it to bear in mind all these other things that are happening at the same time?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Then, of course, neither you or I, we don't have a crystal ball. So it's very hard to say how the deal will be implemented. I think this is a good step for sure. You know, we see there are problems, especially in the MENA region, and with exporting grain, which is very important for the food production and so on, and also other countries. You name it. Many countries also in Africa, but also in Southeast Asia, for example, Sri Lanka. We're exporting grain from Russia and from Ukraine. So this is, I think, I try to stay a bit optimistic about the deal. Of course, what we have seen, it was just after the deal was inked, Russians attacked Odessa port. First they said we didn't do this. Then they said, of course, this was just we have been attacking on with the military installations. So I think we can put it that way. For Russia, it's a good deal. It creates for them it creates some opportunities. Of course, if they can stop the deal, they can still do it. You know, they can still start to attacking ports from which the grain is imported. So they can stop it anytime. It's also good for, but maybe they might think a bit more rationally this way in the context of the fact that this was not a part of the deal, but some sanctions that were put on Russian banks were eased by the EU, which allows exporting grain and basically getting the money from export. And also some of the companies in Russia who are exporting grain are somehow quite close to some people who are very important for the Russian government, people like Mr. Patrushev or people like Mr. Medvedev and the others. So Russia might have some incentives to implement the deal. And I'm sure that also some countries from the Northern Africa, but also countries like Israel, were pushing for the deal because it's quite important, and countries like Egypt, they don't need the problems they might be caused by rising prices of food and so on. So Russia, I think the Russia might play the good guy here, at least partly. And of course, for Ukraine, it's good because if the Ukraine will be able to export grain, they will get a currency and so on. So far, so good. I want to stay somehow optimistic. I'm not sure if my optimism is based on reality or just by being an optimistic person.
By being optimistic,
by nature.
Okay, let's look at the position of your country, Slovakia, and I use Slovakia just as an example of many countries in Europe and even outside Europe who are fairly well contained, properly managed, and just trying to get on with their lives when this happened. And they found themselves in the middle. And of course, bigger countries seem to get the headlines, Germany, France, and so on. They get the headlines in Europe. Whatever decisions they make tends to more or less be passed down, even within the EU, to smaller countries. But this crisis seems to have highlighted the role of smaller countries, because this time they've said, no, you cannot make us do things that will be against our national interests. Now, I know that one country that has had that situation is Hungary, even though you had explained to me how that is. But there are other smaller countries in Europe, like Slovakia, like the Czech Republic, and so on, who are also in this situation. On the streets in Bratislava, what is it that people are saying in terms of all these decisions being made, and which sometimes may not be in the overall interest of the much smaller countries in Europe?
Look, yes, the situation is complicated, but changing borders by the force, as it happened in 2014 with Crimea, and now changing even the governments. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Russian Foreign Minister, just said that they seek the regime change in Ukraine, basically to get rid of democratically elected President Volodymyr Zelensky. We cannot simply sit and look at this, what's going on. You know, Slovakia is neighboring Ukraine. We had a good relations with Ukraine. There are Ukrainians working in my country. Of course, we get a lot of refugees from Ukraine. And yes, for small country, it's not easy to somehow withstand the heat of the conflict. On the other hand, especially for Slovakia, so far I could say I will say so good. We have been in the previous segment we have been talking about this gas deal. It's somehow good for us. We are managing because we are part of the EU. We are managing because we are part of NATO. This week, British Defense Minister Mr. Wallace visited Bratislava, having a conversation with our Defense Minister about how we can help each other. It's possibly Slovakia might donate some mix to Ukraine to fight. And you know, it's I understand questions that about what about your own interests. I think that our own interests, like Slovakia's interests, are definitely in line of having a prosperous democratic country, Ukraine being prosperous and democratic countries, and if it will be occupied or part of it occupied by Russia, it won't happen. You know, Mr. Lavrov is now having a tour in Africa, and yes, as also President Macron was saying, at the end it's up to every country to have that kind of diplomatic relations that this country choose. But I think that, for example, also for African country, and I'm not specialist in Africa, so I'm not going to pretend, it's just very, very general observation. It's our needs photo opportunities with African leaders because they can say at home that, okay, we are not isolated. But I think that for African countries, it is also an opportunity maybe gently, but still push Russia into resolution of the conflict. Because if Russia stopped this war, it can happen. It's up to Russia to stop the war. They started it. So I think that we might see, and hopefully we might see a little bit more diplomacy beyond the scene and so on. I think that also countries in Africa should be involved. This is not about taking a side. This is maybe find players who might be interested in resolving the conflict.
Indeed, absolutely correct. Andrew Matisak, Deputy Head Foreign Desk, Pravda newspaper in Bratislava, Slovakia. As always, nice to see you again. Thank you for your perspective, and do stay safe out there.
Thank you very much. Very good to see you.
After the break, U.S. basketball star Brittney Griner to testify in Russian court today as her trial continues. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Ukraine's central bank governor, Kyrylo Shevchenko, says the country aims to strike a deal for a $15 to $20 billion program with the International Monetary Fund before year-end to help shore up its war-torn economy. Ukraine now faces a 35 to 45% economic contraction in 2022 and a monthly fiscal shortfall of $5 billion after Russia's invasion of the country, and is heavily reliant on foreign financing from its Western partners. Speaking during his visit to London, Mr. Shevchenko said he hoped to agree on a swap line with the Bank of England within weeks, though he did not specify the amount. The governor said Kiev had already submitted its request to the IMF and was now in consultation with the fund over the new financing that he hoped would provide as much as $20 billion over 2 or 3 years in form of a standby arrangement or an extended fund facility. The central bank chief said a new program should provide measures that will help stabilize the economy. In the meantime, German Economic Minister Robert Habeck said a European Union plan to require the bloc's members to use less gas shows Russian President Vladimir Putin that they are united, even if they have compromised to find common ground. Earlier, European Union countries approved a weakened emergency plan to curb their gas demands after striking compromise deals to limit the cuts for some countries as they braced for further Russian reductions in supply. Europe faces an increased gas squeeze from Wednesday, that's today, when Russian Gazprom said it would cut flows through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline to Germany to a fifth of capacity. Energy ministers approved a proposal for all EU countries to voluntarily cut gas use by 15% from August this year to March next year. Let's talk to Ini John Mekwa at this point. Morning, Ini.
Good morning.
There is so much happening. I've heard that 3 times this morning, that there's so much happening. Let's start with the sanctioning of China's purchases of oil. About 6 weeks ago, you and I talked about this possibility that this could eventually happen. Now, Mark Rubio, who is a U.S. Senator, wants the Congress to compel the president to sanction China. For buying Russian oil.
Yes. Remember, even India was supposed to be in this category. They have a sanction. They've grouped as secondary sanctions. You know,
yes.
Of course, you know, U.S., they have some countries that are under sanction and all of that. So I don't know how far this will go, because we do know that China itself is a powerhouse.
And is capable of imposing sanctions
exactly,
of its own.
And they also have their own strengths and all of that. So we don't know how far this will go. But I guess one of the fears that is bringing this up again is that there's a pipeline that is at the final stage, a gas pipeline between Siberia and I think the northern part of China. It's been work that has been going on there for about 8 years. A contribution majorly from Russia, but between Russia and China. You know, they're supposed to be transporting gas. So maybe that's one of the backbones of Russia, when you see them even threatening the EU before time. Even the EU has said, oh, by the end of this year, we're going to do this.
Yes, and they say, well, we are not going to wait till the end of the year.
We don't want to, exactly.
We're going to go.
Yeah, so this is supposed to be a major source of transporting gas from Russia through China to some other countries. And of course, China has been feeding fat on the sanctions on Russia, and the alienation of it has become cheap for them and things like that. So that's why the U.S. is bringing this up. But I mean, analysts will say, we don't know how you're going to sanction China, because China also has its own faith very strong in the ground. But you never know with the U.S. anyway. You never know.
There is, of course, as you pointed out, all of this. Incidentally, that city in China is Shanghai.
Yes, Shanghai,
to which the gas is supposed to go.
Yes.
It's an economic powerhouse within China itself. But put that on one side. On the other side, you have efforts to counter NATO expansion, which is now economic/political. You have Russia and China trying to incorporate.
Yes, remember we talked about BRICS some time ago. We saw Russia coming to Africa, trying to, I mean, countries like South Africa are supposed to be in that BRICS. Yeah. So now, President Joe Biden went to Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago to try to tell them to give more oil. It wasn't fruitful. Maybe, just maybe, this is why. BRICS, of course, is like NATO. So they have some countries, Brazil, South Africa, Russia, of
India,
course,
and China.
Iran is there also, or Iran is supposed to be a member. So they're trying to win these guys over. Now they're looking at Iran and Saudi Arabia, and these are powerhouses when you talk of course, oil, which is what is controlling the world at this time. So this is, again, another collaboration between China and Russia. So you never know with the relationship between Russia and China. Yesterday, we talked about how China is cutting through the Belt and Road.
Yes,
but now
cutting the projects.
Yes, cutting the projects. But now this is another collaboration they are doing, bringing countries together to try to counter NATO, you know, and still talking about a gas pipeline that would help Russia stand and make some money in spite of
whatever else is going on.
Sanction. And, you know, they have their currency swap arrangement that they have, you know, that is supposed to make it easier for them to go through the sanctions and still pay. So you never know with perhaps their relationship is really that off-limits friendship that
that they talked about at the very beginning of all of this.
So maybe whatever we see is just ways to, we're not...
divert attention. Lebanon's parliament, I want to put this properly. There's a World Bank loan of $150 million, which they were supposed to take to get wheat.
Yes.
Now, the wheat wasn't available, so they didn't need the loan.
Yeah.
Now it looks like the wheat is going to be available.
Like...
They want the loan. But is it still available?
I think I need to ask you this. Permit me to ask you this. You talk every day on Russia invasion, and you talk to a lot of analysts and all of that. Do you see this wheat coming through? Because we've had how many attacks now?
I had the two guests I had this morning that same question. One was optimistic, even though he said his optimism, he wasn't sure was based on reality. The other person said, look, it's not likely. Because if the war in those areas is ongoing, then how are the ships sure that they are going to be able to pass through?
I mean, apart from the fact that they're not even going through the normal route because of the mines that are already in the normal route. Now we're even seeing attacks on the infrastructure, you know, and the ports, around the ports. You know, I think I saw the one of yesterday was the housing units and all of that. So how is this supposed to work? I think
we're going to have to see. But Lebanon, if Lebanon takes this loan...
Exactly. Where are they going to get the wheat from? You know, where are they going to get the wheat from? And you know, there's already a protest. 22% of the Lebanese are already food insecure because, you know, most of their food is the bread that comes from wheat.
And all its accompaniments.
Yes, you know, so already, according to World Food Organization, 22% of households in Lebanon are already food insecure. This is confirmed, you know, and if they don't get this even if they get this money, where are they going to
get wheat? Because everybody's waiting for this. So it's going to be, again, a seller's market with buyers having to pay premium.
You know, immediately the deal was signed on Friday, prices of wheat just tapered a bit because everybody was like, finally, something is going to happen. And then we saw the attack on Saturday, and then saw another one, was it on Sunday, on Monday, and of course the price has gone up again. So countries like Lebanon and Egypt, you know, really waiting anxiously
for this, because there are direct links between this supplies and the issue of social order and economic stability.
Yes.
You and I have talked repeatedly about the situation with Egypt.
Yes. The protest and all of that.
So
when people are hungry, they get angry
and all the other things that come subsequently.
Honestly.
Indeed. Ine, of course, will be around later in the day to unpack more of this, along with Ladi Williams on Business Morning, which comes up right after this, and then Business Incorporated later on in the course of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ine.
Thank you for having me.
Let's talk a bit about the sports news emanating from this conflict. U.S. basketball star Brittney Griner is expected to testify in a Russian courtroom today as her attorneys lay out their case for leniency after she admitted to bringing cannabis oil into the country. Griner appeared in court yesterday in Moscow as her lawyers presented the case that she used cannabis oil to relieve chronic pain, not for recreation. Her legal team has presented to the court statements from professionals attesting to her medicinal use of the substance. One of her lawyers, Maria Olena, said there likely will be several more hearings beyond tomorrow before the trial wraps up and the court issues a sentence. The Russian foreign minister has said that the United States is disrespecting Russian law for calling the arrest and imprisonment of two-time women's basketball Olympic champion Brittney Griner wrongful detention. Griner was arrested at Moscow airport in February, a week before the invasion of Ukraine, for possession of hashish oil, which is illegal in Russia. She remains in custody on drug smuggling charges, having pled guilty to this, but said she was using the oil for medicinal purposes, as we've just reported. Griner was on her way to compete in the Russian Premier League with UMMC Ekaterinburg during the Women's National Basketball Association off-season, where she plays for Phoenix Mercury. Ukrainian Slava Medvedenko is auctioning his two National Basketball Association NBA championship rings in a bid to raise money for those impacted by the war in his native country. The former power forward spent 7 seasons at the Los Angeles Lakers, winning NBA titles in 2001 and 2002, alongside the likes of American stars Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal. His 2 championship rings are expected to raise at least $100,000 at the auction, which is due to run until August the 5th. All the money raised is set to go to Medvedenko's Fly High Foundation, with the aim of repairing the sporting infrastructure of schools in Ukraine, most of which have been destroyed in the war. Thanks for being with us. I'm Ladi Akiridoluale. Do join us for an update within the world today at 5 o'clock, and the show is back tomorrow at 9. For now, have yourselves a pleasant midweek ahead. Good morning.